Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story. And I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Hey everybody, this is Studio C41 and I'm Bill Manning, and we have a very interesting topic that I think is very important for us to discuss. So the jokes, just a heads up for everybody, the jokes and everything, we're going to be turning those down.
This may be the hardest thing I've ever done, Bill.
I think this is going to be, well, I think it's for everybody. I think this is a very, very serious conversation that we're going to have this episode. Yeah. So guys, ladies, I think that if this is going to be a very sensitive subject, so if you listen to this podcast with kids and stuff like that, you might want to go ahead and just, set them aside and maybe listen to this personally. I mean, this is going to be very educational. I think it's incredibly important that we talk about this, but I just want to go ahead and put that disclaimer out there for everybody that we're going to be talking about something in photography that's a rather sensitive subject, but it needs to be discussed. So Steven, how are you doing, man?
Dude, I'm doing well, Bill. I'm glad to be here. Shaking off. Did a double header on weddings this weekend, so finally woken up after that. But I'm doing well.
Awesome, man. So John, how are you doing, man?
Hey, man. Good to see you. Good to see all you guys.
Cool.
Doing good.
How you doing, Bill?
Good. I flew in from Cleveland, and so I'm feeling great, man. I'm on cloud 9 right now. So. But it's not about me. We actually have a guest with us. This is Julie Hunter with Naturally Boudoir. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're good.
Doing well.
Good.
Yeah.
Doing awesome. So Julie Hunter is an Atlanta photographer, videographer, very well known in the photography community around here. And she has been displayed on billboards, magazines, and she is also most notably known for her boudoir photography. And this particular topic that we're going to be talking about, I said, we need to have a subject expert on it. But let me quickly explain exactly what happened that kind of triggered this conversation. So, unfortunately, in the Atlanta area, a photographer has been accused of raping a model, and the accusation went out there. And with the Me Too movement that has come out, I felt like this was a subject that we really needed to talk. And I worked with Julie when she was originally with Aperture Rent. And so we've kind of built this professional working relationship. And I said, Julie, I think that it would be absolutely important for us to come out to have you come on to the show and discuss this just because of your line of work. So, Julie, let's talk about it. So what exactly happened with all this?
Well, there's been, quite a few photographers that have been mentioned over the years. Just to give a little brief history, about 8 years ago, I was asked by a model to help begin a model safety group. It started off as a private group where models could interact with each other and ask for references for photographers. That since has been disbanded, and we created a new group called Rise, and that's co-ed and also not public, but it's closed, and so you can come in and be a member. But what we like to do in Rise now is, instead of, and you guys I'm sure are familiar with the internet squabbles and the victim blaming or bashing and things like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do was present a table where people could come from different sides of the conversation, and I could be a mediator and also my admin. There's several moderators in the group that help me do this. And basically we make it a drama-free, yelling-free, name-calling-free, finger-pointing-free zone, so that we can talk about the things that come up in the industry, such as what you said, Bill, about the guy who was accused of rape. He's not the first one. As a matter of fact, the reason that the whole group got started in the first place was because one model got gang raped by two men, and they since were arrested. That was several years ago. And so, but recently another guy was accused of rape. And so it was another chance for us to talk about it in the community and, see if there was anybody else who had that same issue. It seems like every time a story comes out like that, more models come forward, not necessarily about the same person, but their own story about what's happened to them, because they're like, oh, they're not supposed to touch me there. They're not supposed to, it's like, yes. So it's definitely a time for education.
Sure. So I think we, especially as in within the last year, things have definitely come into light with, like Bill mentioned, the Me Too movement. A lot of the, just allegations and real just stories of people who have been abused by, powerful people, the Harvey Weinstein, everything that kind of flowed from that. So it's very fresh on a lot of people's minds. But, even hearing stories from that, this is nothing new. Things were going on with him for decades.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's fortunate that the people are feeling they can have more of a voice now. But like you said, this has been years. It was 8 years ago, you said, when you first were approached by that model?
Yeah, it was about 7-8 years ago.
So, and there's been long documented history of some even like notable photographers who have had people, have models, have had people, celebrities even like accuse them or say like, I didn't feel comfortable with this person. But it seems like now those accusations are actually being taken more seriously.
Yeah.
And one of the toughest things about it, so in your line of work with boudoir, that style of photography is a very, very vulnerable situation, and it requires an incredible amount of trust between the photographer and we'll just go ahead and say the client.
Yeah.
In this type of scenario. And I think that it's important that we talk about, how the model can protect themselves, and how the photographer can protect themselves from an accusation that may not be true. We kind of have to talk about both sides of it, where it could have been a false accusation, or it could have been a misinterpreted situation, right? And so
the photographer, even person, having the chance to like kind of be beyond reproach in that situation,
right?
Yeah.
So let's kind of dive into it. Can you explain to us and to the listeners about what exactly is boudoir photography?
Boudoir photography is basically intimate portraiture is the best way to describe it. It's for men, women, it's not specific to women only. It's to celebrate weight loss. It's to celebrate weight gain. It's
There's
to celebrate
couple boudoir.
A new guy, an old guy, getting rid of somebody, getting somebody new, things like that. So, or it's just about empowerment and, making her feel better or him feel better about themselves. Really, it's really hard to put a clear definition on boudoir, except for I feel like it's an empowering type intimate portraiture is probably the best way to say it.
It's got a level to it that definitely feels much more, like Bill said, vulnerable and personal than almost any other kind of portraiture.
Yeah, and the better boudoir photographers will attempt to get you as vulnerable as possible in a good way, in a positive way, because the more vulnerable you are, the more you're going to be open, and you'll get the best pictures that way. And,
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, though, that there are some photographers that exploit that for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
And that's very difficult, because the trust between the photographer and the client in this is just, there are just lines that you just cannot cross.
Right.
And I think that there are things that the client has to be aware of before sitting down with a photographer in this type of scenario. So I guess, what is something that a client, I guess, kind of walk us through as far as like, how would you normally work with a client before a shoot takes place like this?
So one of the things that I stress the most to other photographers and to models is, or clients, is clear communication, making sure you understand exactly what's going to happen as soon as the camera comes out. No matter what situation, if it's a paid session that I'm having with a client, or I'm using a model for some advertising work for my boudoir business, I make sure that they understand this is exactly what I'm going to expect during the session. That doesn't happen enough in our industry. And that's the education part that I need, I would love to convey today, is that, the more you speak about, don't assume. I feel like there's so many people out there assuming, oh, I thought that'd be okay. We were talking about boudoir and that's what this means to me. Who's supposed to know what boudoir means to everyone unless you say it out loud? This is what I expect. I expect you to get naked. Oh, okay. Well, I don't do that. Okay, fine, cool. Move on to the next person.
Right.
Don't walk into a situation where you're going to get yourself, in a trap.
Or don't have to try to, in the midst of something, force something on someone that they're not comfortable with.
Yes.
I think it even goes beyond boudoir photography to just working with any kind of subject. I've got, from time to time, I think, any photographer who does portraiture will do a collaboration with a model or someone to do something that's, Bill, you and I have both done model shoots with different people, and friends have modeled for us.
Right.
And I think the setting expectations, like you said, is huge to begin with, but also that's always been a huge thing for me, is trying to make sure, whether it is a model collaboration or even a wedding client, I tell somebody, if there's something you're not comfortable with, please tell me, say it. Even if I ask you to lean up against this tree and you feel weird about that, tell me about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether that or it's a pose or an outfit or anything, just being very clear. And I think from the photographer side of things, setting that from the jump, letting your subject know, tell me if you're not okay with this.
If I can interject here, there's a lot of things that can happen in an unregulated industry like ours. And, I see things that happen in weddings that I've been wanting to see happen on a kind of a national level or whatever, that could be really put down into a written form of some sort, but something that get that word out, that educates and informs photographers and models and brides and grooms, whatever it is. There's situations I've been in where the lines were being crossed. We were discussing this earlier before we went on the air, just talking about how you can have a problem with a groom or whatever,
or a groomsman, usually,
or whatever,
or even just a guest at a wedding.
Who hasn't been in that situation? I've been in those kinds of weddings. They're like, oh man, I got to pull this guy aside, and I'm the photographer, right? Where's the? And so you have to step in and say, because you have going in as a photographer saying, there's a set of guidelines, there's a set of rules, right? This is a moral and ethical issue, right? These are what they call the absolutes, right? You can't argue this, politically or whatever. This is just the way it is, right? That's why we have laws based on what is moral and ethical. And this is the same thing here. And this really brings up this whole issue of we're all sitting here today saying, what are we going to go from this point forward and get the word out there to say, we need to have things brought up to spec, updated, whether it's a model release or whether but it's this conversation that needs to be written down, right? On something that it's like our constitution kind of a thing, right? We have to write this stuff down. We, the photographers, what do we believe in? And what do we stand for? And saying because then you can start with 2 people, 3 people, and then explode to a big movement that said, for all of us to say we have this agreement, no matter where we live, what state we are, what country we're in, that there's this guideline we have. And it's about protecting human rights, protecting human life, right? The rights of people, the dignity of people, right? It's coming back, I think, to me, that conversation, because I read this, it's like, gosh, I got 2 daughters, that want to model. I mean, my goodness, right? I've got a real serious thing to, but even so, it doesn't matter. It's even if I didn't have that, I have as a photographer myself, right? I mean,
well, and I think the big problem is that there are photographers that do this without fully understanding what is at risk.
Yeah.
For going into this, right? I mean, It's just, as Julie said earlier, it's assuming, right? You just go into this type of situation, and if you make assumptions and you're not communicating clearly, those situations, the photographer is creating a situation that's incredibly risky for not only for the photographer but for the model as well. That's in this particular shoot.
Right.
So for the model, I think it is important that they know that in these types of shoots that there should be a second, or I would say in this particular case, a third party involved with this type of shoot. Yes.
That's what we call them in the model industry, is escorts.
Okay.
So we always encourage like take an escort, meaning a friend, a boyfriend or whatever, just somebody that can be there. They don't necessarily have to be in the room 100% of the time, but as long as they're present in the building close by, so that if something happened, they could, get out to them.
Right. And then you also have other professionals that are involved with this production, essentially, where you have stylists, maybe makeup artists, hairstylist, and wardrobe possibly as well. So,
an assistant perhaps, or whoever
an assistant,
maybe.
yeah.
Right.
And I think it, with dealing with a female client, that it is important that the assistant in this particular case is a female. I mean,
yeah, if it's a male photographer, especially.
It's a male,
not to say that its rules are different for men and women behind the camera, but there's definitely, in some ways they kind of are. I mean, and it's. I think ultimately it boils down to the comfort and safety of the person being photographed.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that, again, it all boils back to the photographer being absolutely clear with expectations, saying, there needs to be, how do you want to do this? Do you want a makeup artist? Do you want a hairstylist? Do you want, those are options that I think the photographer should include in when it comes to doing a shoot like this.
So I have a quick question for you, Julie. When it comes to a lot of, because through the group that you've been doing and even just kind of putting yourself out there as kind of this mediator between models and photographers and hearing people's stories, do you find that a lot of times like the abuse comes in kind of the TFP, the trade for photo or trade for print, the kind of free collaboration shoots, more so than like a paid client shoot?
Yes and no. There's definitely the more well-known a photographer is, sometimes apparently gives her or him some sort of idea that they can do what they want because they're a certain level. And so that comes into play with like agencies and whatnot. And so agencies have been becoming more hyper vigilant about vetting their photographers because of all this Me Too, because of all this stuff coming out. And they were like, I had no idea this guy who we hired to be the agency model, which would be a paid gig.
Yeah.
On the flip side of the TF that you were talking about. But of course, I do agree with you. And I do feel like in the unregulated, no rules, there's really no model releases being done. There's no real communication happening. It's just some quick collaboration over Facebook or Instagram. And boom, now we're in a situation where the model's she's assaulted or whatever.
Right. Yeah. She loses control of the images. I think that's a very important topic where these images are taken and maybe the photographer is incredibly proud of the work that they put. And I mean, there are instances where they do, some amazing art with it and they want to share it, but they don't clear it with the client.
Yeah. So in that particular case, that doesn't really apply because a photographer should have the ability to post those pictures no matter what. Now,
sure.
But I mean, why put things out there that don't represent you as a good photographer? Why would you put junk out there?
Right.
And I mean, it happens.
Sure.
It does happen.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know, just because it's been kind of sticking in my mind about that TF, that trade for situation. Because I've some stories I've read, it seems like the photographers use that as leverage over the model or the subject, being like, well, I'm doing this for free for you, so you have to do what I want.
Right.
You have to do this thing for me now. And
to just to go off of that, the beautiful part about doing a TF or a collaboration is working together as a team.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Because models are highly creative.
Oh, yeah. Right. Definitely.
And photographers are highly creative. And if you allow each other to do, like for sometimes we're all photographers, you have this idea in your mind. You're going, I want to do this.
Right.
And you go out and the sun's not where you want it, or the weather changes, or some situation changes where now you're shooting after dark instead of during the day. And sometimes those models will be like, maybe we could do this. And they have really great,
definitely.
plan B ideas. And some photographers, like you're saying, come in and they bulldoze and say, no, this is my shoot. We're going to do it this way. And nobody wants to be around that. And there's also models on the flip side that do the same thing. Like they want it to be all about them and this is what they want.
Sure.
Yeah, it is.
Julie, I was wondering, what are the things that I guess when it really comes down to it that are kind of do have to be like the hard and fast, like this is absolutely out of the question.
Yeah.
I even outside of just, like making assumptions, definitely. But
Yeah.
what are some other things that just, a photographer should entirely avoid? And if a model is in a situation where these things are happening, to know that it is not all right and they can say no to these things too. What are some of the things that you would kind of say are just like definitely without question wrong?
And to add on top of that as well is, I guess the biggest concern out of this is that when you're in this type of shoot it's this person said this and this person said that.
Right.
And then how do you tell the truth between, if it's just those two people?
Right. So because I am a mediator and I talk to both models and photographers, sometimes I have to think about, okay, what's my audience at the moment and what can I tell them about safety?
Sure.
Because safety for photographers is completely, not always, but sometimes very much different than for the models themselves. And so, one of the things we encourage is take somebody with you, take an escort. Also, before you even get to the place where you're going to the photo shoot, vet that photographer. Like, look up who they've shot before. We had a conversation recently about photographers wanting to do, as a matter of fact, I got an email. It was from a catfisher. And so he was using a popular photographer, his picture as his thumbnail. And he sent me a email asking me if I wanted to model.
Oh,
and
wow.
I was like, you picked the wrong person
Oh, man.
to go down this road because of who I am and everything.
Right.
And so I immediately went on to Facebook and found the name because I thought it was this actual person because he was using his thumbnail, had his name, but it was at Outlook. And nobody has Outlook anymore. And so I went to the guy and looked at his page and I saw that he had put a screenshot up and said, this is what's happening. If you get one of these emails, just ignore it. This guy is not me, blah, 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 blah. And I also reached out to some of my mutuals, which were models and makeup artists. And I said, do you know this guy? Is he legitimate? Like, do I need to be concerned? Do I need to start warning the public about this because of what he was asking me to do? And I won't go into all that detail, but he was basically promising large amounts of money for me to model a certain way.
Oh,
me,
wow.
who through naturallyboudoir@gmail.com, by the way. So it wasn't even my personal email. It was my business email
Jeez.
showing that I'm actually a photographer. So this catfisher had not done his due diligence and found out that anyway. So eventually he figured out, oh, you're a photographer, not a model. And I said, oh, now you're concerned about truth. Anyway, so, vetting the photographers is what I was getting at was, going to Facebook, looking to see who they've shot, ask those models, was this a safe experience? Now, let me flip that around really quickly and touch on a subject that needs to be talked about as well, which is communication between models. And with the situation that we had recently with the rape, there was a model who took it upon herself to start asking all of the people who she saw in his portfolio. She started going through them and like messaging them through Facebook and Instagram and saying,
Wow.
what was your experience? She would do it really generically at first and say, what was your experience? And at first, most every one of these models would say, oh yeah, he's good. He's a good guy, great photos, whatever.
Right.
Knowing what had happened, she then pressed and said, what I heard was he likes to touch his models. Immediately, they would change their story and say, oh yeah, he does get drunk a lot and touches models.
Wow.
So imagine my fury, because here I am trying to protect these girls. And the best information you can get, I feel like, is from a peer in the industry. So if the models aren't telling each other the whole truth about what's going on between these photographers, who can say, right?
Right.
If photographers can't talk to each other and models can't talk to each other, how are we ever going to get communication started up between them, between a photographer and a model? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
No, that's
a movement that needs to happen. I mean, between model to model. You know,
well, and I mean, we have. I think there are the tools and the resources for that to happen. I mean, like for example, completely unrelated to the topic, but like the film photographers group. That is a group of 30,000 members, right? And I mean, if something gets posted up there and it's like for example, the Adorama post, right? That just went nuts because it hit that group and so many people saw it, right? And I think something like that, if and it probably does exist, and I'm just completely ignorant of it, but I think that's absolutely true. I think that models should have a network where they can openly and safely discuss their interactions.
So here's the problem with that. So 8 years ago, I told you I was asked to help start a private model group for safety.
Yeah.
And that's what it was supposed to be. Now, granted, I'm not a model, but I was asked to help oversee it because I was a female photographer. And we also vetted everyone who came in. Like, we had to make sure that they were not currently working with a known predator because, unfortunately, there are models who will support and also feed a predator with other models. So in other words, they will present themselves as, it'd be like if you were looking at their portfolio or if you were looking at their profile on Facebook and you saw happy, fun photos with his family, you would go, oh, that's a safe guy. I can trust him. And so the job of the model, let's call her the spy. The job of the spy was to present herself as like a safety net. Like you can work with him because I'm here. It'll be safe. And then she leaves and he gets to do what he wants.
Wow.
And so that's not only models, that would be, I've heard of stylists doing that as well, assistants, anyone female. Right. So, again, when we started the model group, it was great. We were sharing. I thought we were really doing something. And little by little, these other people would come in. And, you don't want to not let everybody into the group.
Right.
But at the same time, this started happening where screenshots of the private group were getting shared with these predators going, these girls are talking about you. These girls are talking about you. And again, the trust is broken.
Right.
It's that model to model, they're the strongest voice for each other.
Right.
If I could, I can't say that to them any more than, guys, if you would just talk to each other, it would be so much better in the industry. Because if you told each other the absolute truth of what's really going on, then I feel like standards would be held up higher because some models are going, I don't really care. It's okay. I don't care that he does that. And other models are like, absolutely no, that is not acceptable.
Right.
And I feel like those standards need to be,
Let me ask you this question. What do you consider to be the age group of the most vulnerable?
It's really hard to put an age on it because some girls start at agencies when they're like 9 and 10 years old.
Right.
But they're not doing provocative stuff until they're 18. And that's when they may meet some guy. You know what I mean? So you can't really. But I would say probably right at about 18 to 22.
So if that's the case, let's say that's the case, generally speaking. How do you reach that, right? Because they're so young, they're so new, and they grew up with all of this social media, all of this imaging, all of this kind of, I need to be like this too. Because there was an article I was reading recently about, my wife's a school teacher, so it comes up a lot in our house, but just how these young girls are so driven to want to go into something like that, just so they can get the likes and the shares. And
let me give you even a different situation. Some of the girls who have been assaulted aren't wanting to be models at all. They're minding their own business, working at Starbucks, just being cute for the day. And somebody walks in, a male photographer predator, will see how cute they are and say, oh, you're cute. Let me take you back to my studio. Who's not going to want photos of themselves?
Right.
Why would they not trust him? Why would they automatically think he's a predator? But because I call these one-offs, because they will never model again after that experience.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they get them in the studio, and this is not, of course, I hate to use the phrase, not all. It is not all people who reach out to baristas and whatnot because they're cute. But that is a trend, predators are smart and dumb. They're smart enough to hurt girls who don't have a voice inside of the industry. Because industry girls will talk to each other. But a girl from Starbucks who has no connection to the model industry whatsoever or the photography industry wouldn't know to come to me. They don't know me. They don't know Rise. They don't know anybody in photography. So they just get hurt and then they go back home and they cry and that's it. And hopefully they tell a cop. Hopefully they tell a parent. 9.5 times out of 10, they will not tell anybody is the problem.
And that's a date rape with a camera.
Exactly. Yeah. It's exactly that. And that photographer knows he'll get away with it because he has, like you were saying before, now he has nude photos. It'd be like, you tell the cops, and
got
I'll show your
blackmail,
parents.
basically,
Yeah, I'll
yeah.
show your
Right.
parents what you were doing.
And it's hard to say, okay, technically photographer because he had a camera, but that doesn't make him a photographer either.
Oh,
right?
no.
It's just somebody that went out and has a camera and is, right?
Sadly, a lot of these guys are really good photographers too.
Wow.
And that's really, really the hard part, because you can walk into Starbucks and go, yeah, look at my work. And they're showing them the work on their cell phones. And the girl goes, oh my gosh, that's just, it doesn't really take a whole lot to impress the non-photography community too, because we know that.
Well, and it even happens at the highest levels. I mean, we've seen the news articles about Terry Richardson, right? I mean,
Right.
you know, he's the photographer that has been on the covers for Vogue, GQ, Glamour, Vanity Fair, you name it. And then when the accusation came out as a result of Harvey Weinstein, that models started coming out and saying Terry Richardson is a known problem in the industry, and everybody knows about it, and nothing is being done about it.
Terry is a prime example of, I know this is happening, but who's going to do anything? Or the people who have been shot by him aren't talking to each other going, you don't want to go do that. Or they just don't care. There's been people that have been assaulted by him that just go, I don't really care.
Right.
Which is sad.
Because some people dropped him, but some did not.
Exactly.
They retained him. They're like, too bad.
That's insane.
And that opens up, that's the things that I started reading about that really is going on in the fashion industry, where they're just turning a blind eye to it, it seems. Not all.
Yeah.
But there's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's sad because, I mean, you hear about these stories, and then, like, for example, another article that popped up a while back was there's a book on Amazon that's titled How to Seduce Women Through Photography. I mean, like, this, like, I when I put this piece together, like, a part of me was like, do I buy this book to understand this?
Right.
Or, you know, or like now
yeah.
it's like, oh, geez, now
Our
this is gonna-
admins had the same conversation. We
Right.
talked about getting it just to be like, surely not. But the reviews underneath that Amazon book is
Right.
like, are you kidding me? I mean,
right.
it's a GWC handbook is what I call it.
So what exactly is a GWC handbook?
Well, GWC is a slang for guy with cam, meaning a guy who uses he uses a camera as a way to seduce girls.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, it's just disappointing that, you know, something like this can be easily obtainable, you know, and it's incredibly disappointing to hear that kind of
I think
stuff.
it's really a slap in the face because, I mean, you know, let's take photography out of it. There's several books out there on Amazon for single guys and how to charm women and blah, blah, blah. I think it's kind of on the same level, but it's disrespectful to us. We take this personally because it's our profession. You know, we are the photographers, and it's hard enough to be a male photographer without that kind of stuff out there, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Right. I mean, like we were touching on it earlier, but none of this is isolated to just the photography industry.
Exactly.
I think this is a larger kind of cultural and societal narrative that's come to light because of some very brave people and women specifically speaking out and feeling like they have a voice. So I guess, Julie, to anybody who's possibly listening to this, who's maybe experienced something or is worried about speaking out or doesn't really know where to turn, what advice could you give, or where could you even tell somebody to go if they feel like they've been possibly like the victim of abuse by a photographer, or even any kind of sexual abuse at all?
Well, the first thing I always try to encourage all assault victims to do is to report it to the police. Now, I know that's very hard for a lot of assault victims.
Yeah.
But it's very, 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 very important that a police report is filed as soon as possible, because the less that the police know about it, then nothing can be done.
Right.
You know, and then the stories pile up, and now you got 15 stories about a photographer, but then it's just all air quotes stories. It's not police reports that are being filed, and it doesn't take away the legitimacy of the incident if they don't file a police report. However, it helps another girl not be assaulted tomorrow or next week or the next month.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, the next step would be to find a counselor, a therapist, so they can work through that problem. Bill was mentioning earlier, rainn.org, RAINN.org is a really great organization that helps sexual assault victims specifically. I worked with them a few years back and did some specific imagery for their posters and whatnot. And it really is a good place to reach out. Now, as far as on the local level, if they needed to talk to someone that's local and be like, hey, you need to know this person is in the industry and this is what they did to me. I've kind of, like we've talked about before, I've kind of become the mediator between models and photographers and started a group called Rise, which is co-ed, and that brings everyone together so that we can talk about not just people and calling people out, but more about education and safety and what we can and cannot do and things like that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Is there a phone number you can give out to our listeners that for this sexual assault hotline?
For RAIN.org, it was 1-800-656-4673. And I'm sure, Bill, you'll put these in the show notes.
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
So,
I guess for Rise, the program that you're putting together or that you've put together, how do I think it's important for photographers and models that are listening to this program. I guess how do they get in connection with Rise?
It's currently it's just a Facebook group that you can join. It has the letters RISE- with respect, integrity, safety, and education. That's the full name of the group.
Okay.
And so anyone can join that. We do vet everyone who comes in, again, because we don't want known predators to also be in the group. So there's questions that we ask, like all Facebook groups do nowadays. So we do try to vet everyone, and we do try to have as many open conversations as possible without hostility or confrontation. Well, I mean, there's going to be confrontation,
Sure,
but with as less drama as possible, basically.
Sure. Okay, and we'll add that link to the Facebook group in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
So.
We do have a website, but it's still we're still trying to figure out like what exactly the website's going to do, except for point people to RAIN or other counseling situations like that, because that's essentially what we want, is to have like a hub for, I don't want it necessarily to be just Atlanta, for Rise. I want it to be global.
Sure.
I want people to talk to each other and be like, well, this is what happened to me, and this is how I solved it, or whatever.
Right.
Awesome. Well, Julie, I guess, how do we reach out, and how do we find your work? Your work is fantastic, by the way.
Thank you.
So, what's your website, Facebook, Instagrams, and all that?
So I am Naturally Boudoir everywhere. So naturallyboudoir.com. I'm on Facebook, Naturally Boudoir, and I'm on Instagram with Naturally Boudoir. So
awesome.
Cool. Well, I guess as we're wrapping up here, my last question would just be, Julie, what is the biggest thing that I guess we as photographers, anybody listening, if you could have like a single takeaway point, for trying to start to do something to fix this problem, what would it be?
Honestly, and I've said this a lot, but it has a lot to do with people talking to each other, no matter if it's in the photography industry or outside of it. You need someone to talk to and, tell your situation to. As far as photographers, they need to, especially in this day and age, they need to protect themselves with having a stylist available, having an assistant available, someone in the room so that they cannot be accused. If they are living above reproach, that's the way to do it. There will never be an accusation if someone's in the room. There may be, but easily you can say, well, my assistant was there and they know that didn't happen. As far as models, be mindful of what you're walking into. Vet the photographers. Ask for a release. Check out their website. Check other models that they've shot before. Ask, do they have experience shooting the particular genre that they're wanting to shoot you in? As far as like boudoir is concerned, of course, like we talked about before, there's a lot of people that go, "Oh, boudoir, I want to do that too," and they like jump on the bandwagon, but they don't actually get any sort of education on how to do so. They're just like, "Girls in lingerie, sign me up. I'll do that too." And there is definitely some etiquette involved. Now, not all photographers are going to agree with me because I tend to be a little more on the guarded, safe side just because of who I'm around and what I do and this kind of talk that I do right here. But when it comes to my clients, I try to give them the full experience and all of that, but it's in a safe environment. But again, I'm a female photographer. It's a little different for me. It's a little easier for me. But the thing is the world needs the male photographers that are out there that are good too.
Sure.
I
absolutely.
don't ever want to be one of those people that go, oh, only a woman can do. That's not true. There's plenty of really amazing male photographers out there. And only if they can keep it professional and keep it above the line will we will be able to get past conversations like this, and we won't have to do this anymore,
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important that for the photographer, they have to look inside and look at their philosophy when they're shooting something like this, right? What is in the photographer's heart? What are they trying to accomplish, right? Are they trying to empower the person? Are they helping that person trying to get past, a difficult time? Those are things that, you want to keep the note positive. And if it's not positive and it's for nefarious reasons, don't even go down that route.
I think even if it's just for selfish reasons. If, like Julie, like you said, like, oh, awesome, this is a way I can get to see girls in lingerie.
Right.
Even if there's no assault, no anything that happens, if you're doing this to take something from somebody else.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's also the thing too of, I'd like to say this out to photographers out there, that it's very easy for a photographer to believe that your other photographers are your competition. And that's not true. When you really know what your business is and what your model is, nobody can compete with you. And yet I see so many photographers that are islands, meaning they don't link arms with other photographers and build a network of trust, build a network of friendship, and really accountability. And keeping an eye on each other. I have that with other photographers, and it's like we do it for a lot of reasons. One, we refer each other, but also we have this trust and this code and these conversations. We meet for coffee, we do these things, we help each other, we care about each other, and we also educate each other that we're not each other's competition, right? Because we all have something unique to do and to bring to the world, and that's the thing I really want to get out there is, guys, you stop being an island. Get together put your ego aside, throw it out, and get together with other photographers that share your values, share what you believe, and what you understand and what you agree upon, and you'll create a movement, at least among yourselves, that now you have something to say to each other candidly and honestly and openly, and in doing so, you produce something that is really worth other photographers wanting to be around and wanting to be a part of and wanting to emulate. And you set a good example, and you also become a role model, which is something else we need too.
Yeah,
So-
to add to that, because I've recently moved to just south of Chattanooga, I wanted to touch on what you said, because there's a vast ocean of difference between living in Chattanooga with photographers and Atlanta. Atlanta is, vast and wide of client potential. So there's no ever any, like you said, that, we all have something to bring to the world. It's super easy to say that in Atlanta. And I'm saying that for your podcast listeners that are living in podunk nowhere,
Right.
that only have a certain amount of photographers near them. It's super easy in Atlanta to hook up and link arms and network and do all that kind of stuff with other Atlanta photographers and in other large cities. But I actually have heard, I'm actually the admin of the Atlanta Photographers Guild, and I've heard people in other states go, you guys really are awesome down there. You guys talk to each other and you work together and you help each other, and that's really cool. We don't have that here. We don't have that in our state and city and whatever. And I believe after being a part of like a smaller group or a smaller city, it is because the pool is just so much smaller. The clientele is also very small. You have population, the population of said city, and then you break that down to price group of who wants to pay for that certain level of photography. And then now your pool is really small, right? And now you're all diving into that one little tiny pool. And so and the reason I'm bringing it up is because you were talking about getting together with our photographer. It's very hard for our industry to take our egos and put them on a shelf
Put it aside.
somewhere
Yeah.
and talk to someone about, this industry. But I feel like every time I open up to another photographer or meet someone who's kind of on that same cool, chill factor with me, and they're, they're growing and they're wanting to learn and they're open and I'm open, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But when you get those people with egos and they're like, I'm here because, I'm famous and you can't touch me, it's sad.
Yeah, it's
and
hard.
so I just wanted to encourage, even if you can't find someone in your city, like try to find someone online to talk to.
Yeah.
And you'll never grow as a photographer if you remain isolated. And you can come up with all excuses all you want, but ultimately it comes down to your own fear and insecurity. I mean, you've got to let it go, and because what you're throwing away, you don't see, is the power of now. Not everybody's going to agree with you, but look, you'd be surprised if you were willing to be vulnerable and have that open conversation with another photographer. It's amazing how you can just get past the nonsense and just be honest with each other, get past the BS, go have a beer or something and just say, look, we can just argue, we can support our egos all day, but I don't care. Let's get past that and really just help each other and discover what we didn't realize, that we're stronger than the sum of both of us, right?
John, to a point to that is, being in kind of community and even Facebook groups and things with other photographers is how I even realized that this was a problem. This whole issue of like harassment and abuse was a problem in the industry, and was something that I wasn't even like fully aware of as a photographer working with models until I started actually hearing from other photographers, people like Julie, who are actually trying to bring these things to light, to actually like be advocates for the victims and to try to do something about this. So I think it is definitely valid to get out of your own bubble, to start, having those conversations. Photographer, model, anyone, like Julie said, having somebody that you can actually find, you can talk to about this stuff.
I have a question for you guys as well. And
Sure.
I met a couple of friends actually. Both of them are mostly video guys. And so, but we were talking about like what I was going to be talking about tonight. And I said, part of my problem in trying to educate the industry is the fact that I'm a woman. And we were talking about me working at Aperturant, and some guys don't want to hear, that I know about gear more than they do, and et cetera, et cetera. So in this specific subject, it is very hard for me to articulate to the male population of the industry without sounding like a nagging woman or a feminist or old, whatever.
Yeah.
So you were saying you didn't know until you got into Facebook groups. There's a lot of my friends, male photographers, who were the same way. How would you know? You're not getting targeted.
Right.
Guys don't get targeted. They're going after females, female photographers, female models, mostly. There are some males who have been assaulted as well. So how is it for someone on my position and where I am as a mediator? What do you suggest that I do to convey my message so that it's heard as actual, good information, education? Like, wow, I didn't realize this was happening. Do you think that you would receive that better from a male? I mean, being very, very honest about that.
I think it'd be said from both. And I'd love to see a male-female podcast that addresses this issue, that gets out there and say, hey, let's just talk about this, right? Male-female balanced, both sides of the conversation. But it's something that is out there, that is getting known. I tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if that thing grows. But it's a way for them to at least know it exists, that the conversation exists. You were talking before about communication. That's one powerful medium. Look at this. 3 of us got together and look at this thing. It's going all around the world, and we're a startup podcast, right? But it's amazing how when you just touch on something that is so it's so potent, but it's so important, but it connects to a human suffering. There's nothing more needed and more powerful than that, to address that and to address that issue, but to have 2 people that really care, and that is really, I guess, a call out there for anybody that's listening. Hey, and you can do it on Skype. You don't have to be in the same town. You're like, hey, we'll get together and we'll do the show together on Skype, right?
Yeah.
But at least we're talking about it, and it's something that can be known. Because you'd be surprised how fast things can spread today, right? Especially when it's a subject that deals with something that has to do with human suffering. So that's my input.
I guess mine. It's really hard to think, because I try to so much be on the side of the victim like on the side of, to give them the benefit of the doubt. Because so just friggin' just ridiculously, obscenely, like our society sides with on the side of the
Accused,
abuser,
yeah.
of the accused, of the abuser, the one who's doing the harm instead of the one who's been harmed by this.
People just cannot believe that would happen.
Yeah.
That's the first place they go, which is incomprehensible. Like, how do you first go to that couldn't have happened? You're just lying.
Yeah. At this point, maybe it's just from, I don't know, trying to be much more aware and sensitive to it myself. The recent, the last year with the Me Too movement and everything, the fact that I hear an accusation now, and my first thought is like I can't believe that didn't happen. It's like I totally believe that happened. And geez, I don't know. It's a really tough question. I'm glad you asked it, and I think it's anybody listening should be thinking about that too. Maybe it is just, I think the thing that needs to come out from men to just be holding men accountable, period.
Yeah.
To actually be saying like, no, you need to listen to these women who are going through this, or who are being an advocate for this, or like, if I would point somebody to you, even being like, no, you need to see what Julie is doing and what she's actually been able to say about, this problem. Because you are boots on the ground when it comes to it. And I'm not. And but I guess even being able to say to someone else, this is not okay, this is real, this is a problem. I don't know. It's not really a good answer to your question, other than just, I guess maybe having some, and it's stupid that it needs to be this, that like some man or some guy needs to come alongside and be like, no, this is legitimate and you need to pay attention.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it is sad, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really get down to the bones of it, is the truth. Some men, and we all know this, will not listen unless it's another man telling them. And that, and I'm not going to say that's fine. I don't want to end up with that, but it is just what it is.
Yeah, it is.
And so, in order to get the message across, because if that's my barrier, well, then I'm going to have to bring in someone that's a male, so that they can. I mean, I do have several, by the way, the moderators in Rise. There are a few guys in there, and they are really great. And the thing about it is because I've been burned over the years with guys who've gotten really close to me. As a matter of fact, the situation that happened with the guy who was accused of rape, that's exactly what he did. Mm-hmm. He got super close to me so that I wouldn't look at him. So I wouldn't watch him. I wouldn't check to see what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we have to deal with as trying to vet all these people, is like, oh yeah, they talk the talk. They talk about, yeah, I'm so concerned and da. But yet on the back end, this is what they're really doing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think I know, Bill. I want to get to yours too.
Finish your thought.
I don't know. Just thinking about, like, honestly, the women. We keep talking about women mainly because they are the majority of the victims in this case. But the victims who have come out and have been able to be brave enough to tell their stories, whether it's anonymously or not, it still takes an incredible level of courage, and they're risking a lot by doing it. I think as men and people outside of it, we need to be willing to risk losing a friendship, whatever it may be. Just, we need to be able to be brave too. I think that is another thing, just to be able to hold each other accountable and to be able to point to these things as true and real and going on, and not be afraid that, like, oh well, but my guy, this dude I've known since high school likes to make kind of the occasional off-color joke, and I'm probably he's not gonna like it if I tell him that, hey, that's not all right to talk about a woman like that.
Yeah. It's not okay.
Yeah, I think, I know it's incredibly difficult in your position where guys go, oh, that's complete BS. That doesn't happen. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just saying that because you're just a female, right? Mm-hmm. Those type of people, I truly don't think would even listen to another male. In all honesty, I mean, just for example, in our Atlanta photographers group, there was one person. I brought it up. I posted it in there. And one person was incredibly sensitive about it, the whole situation. And I said, if something like this happened, you need to talk about it. And then somebody came in and said, what, the phone number for 911 has changed? I'm like, okay, that right there, like me as a male came out and said, this is wrong. Right.
Yeah.
And I still had somebody come out and was completely insensitive about the situation.
Right.
I truly, truly think that anybody that holds photography at a high standard, regardless of male, female, I mean, we're all adults here. And I think one of the things that, I saw you post this, and I immediately said, this is hitting too close to home. And we needed to do something. We needed to talk about this by just us having this conversation, males and females having this conversation, you creating a community where males can talk to females about this happening, I think is probably the most important thing out of all this, is that we are all on the same playing field when it comes to this stuff.
We were trying to take my idea of having Rise and having it be co-ed and have them come to the table together was to take away the mystique of, the whole thing I told you about, the screenshots and being shared with these predators. Yeah. Well, now you can't say, oh, I heard that you were talking about me in some private group. Well, no, now it's here. It's here for you to see. And we talk about people with names and we screenshot and say, you need to answer to this. Like, what do you have to say about that? And some of the people who have been talked about, I'm actually connected to on Facebook. So I would see that and go, well, let me just pull them into Rise and say, you've been mentioned. Why don't you defend yourself? Right. Why don't you say, like, this is what you meant by this post? Because sometimes it's statuses, sometimes it's something they said in a private message, sometimes it's whatever, whatever the situation is, where obviously they could screenshot. I want them to come in and say, this is what I meant. That was totally misunderstood. Or, oops, I probably shouldn't have done, I want either them to own up to it or say, no, this is what I meant. You're not seeing the whole conversation. That's exactly what I wanted to see, because a lot of times, we don't get the whole story on the news. We get exactly what the media wants us to understand is the story when it's not the story at all, and that's the point of Rise, is I want to get the full story. I don't want to just listen to the model. I want to hear from the photographer and why he chose to do that, or vice versa. If the photographer is calling out a model, I want to bring her in or him and find out the whole story between the two of them. Yeah. So one of the things, one more thing I wanted to say to you guys, which I thought was very interesting, is that when the private model group was formed, I was actually brought to lunch by one of my close male photographer friends. And he said, I need to let you know that there's a group of male photographers that think that you're just doing this to keep the pool of models to yourself.
Jeez.
So the reason that you're doing a model safety group is just so that you can monopolize the model pool.
Control your market.
Yeah. And so, I had never even crossed my mind that would even be a question, only because I know what I'm doing. They don't know what, again, this was before the open group. This was the private group. And so he knew me well enough to be able to say that openly, which I appreciated. I appreciated that he came to me and said that there were male photographers in Atlanta thinking that I was using this model safety group. So again, another reason why I opened Rise, because I was like, now you can see, I'm not using the ruse of a safety group as some sort of way to expand my model pool at all. Right. If anything, I shied away from even talking to the girls that were in the model safety group just because I didn't want to be accused of that. After he said that to me, I made it a point to not even reach out to any of them to say, hey, would you like to do a shoot together? I would just use girls that I had already used before. Yeah. Right. So just to let you know the minds of the industry.
It's unfortunate that people think like that. And I think there's just no way around it. I mean, you always have the people that are the conspiracy theorists, right?
There's somebody's making these accusations so they can get something out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's just no good, easy solution other than just keep the communication going. Yeah. So, well, Julie, thank you again for coming out and having this really hard discussion with us. It needed to happen. Yeah. Again, anybody that has been a victim, please don't stay silent about it. there are programs out there. Julie's program that RISE, Respect, Integrity, Safety, Education. There's also RAINN, RAINN.org. You can also contact 1-800-656-4673. So, Julie, thank you again. I really appreciate you coming out, and best of luck with all your endeavors.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.